From introducing you to an overview of the plot to outlining basic controls and gameplay, tutorials are supposed to be the thing you trust, a more forgiving environment to learn the ropes before, in From Software games' case, you're then strangled by them. While most games are content with giving players the space they need to brush up on their skills, there are some titles which take full advantage of the player not realizing something unexpected is right around the corner. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 video game tutorials that played cruel tricks on players. Number 8. Elden Ring. It's completely missable. As brutally difficult as Elden Ring is, even the cruel and genius developers at From Software weren't heartless enough to throw players into the lands between without a crash course in the basics. However, getting to the tutorial in Elden Ring wasn't a straightforward task. In fact, so many players missed the tutorial completely that From Software signposted it better in an update, shortly after the game's release. Upon awakening in a cavern after being annihilated by the game's first boss, players will see a ghostly figure sitting by a precipice. Previously, the game didn't inform players that getting to the tutorial area required jumping into this hole that would otherwise spell death in most games. Without being equipped with the fundamentals, players were wandering out into the world less prepared than they should have been, only to then get flattened by the Tree Sentinel. Number 7. Sheepdog and Wolf. Game over. A nostalgic gem that doesn't get as much recognition as it deserves, Sheepdog and Wolf, also known as Looney Tunes Sheep Raider, is a puzzle game that sees players take on the role of Ralph Wolf, as they figure out how to steal sheep from under the watch of Sam Sheepdog. Players will spend most of their time sneaking around disguised as a bush and using items to solve increasingly complex puzzles to stealthily snag their quarry. There's a lot to learn, but thankfully a very polygonal Daffy Duck is there to assist, and after the cartoon duck whisks Ralph to the set of the titular game show, it's time for the tutorial. Being a Looney Tunes game, the start of this tutorial is one big gag. Players are greeted with 3 signs warning them not to play, with the final one instructing players to cross the white line in front of them to begin. Doing so instead results in a cutscene where Ralph is hit by an anvil, run over by a van, and hit by a falling piano before you're then given a game over screen. Thankfully, Daffy does eventually come to your rescue and the real tutorial can begin. Number 6. Prey. It's all a simulation. After players select which version of protagonist Morgan Yu they'd like to play as, Prey opens in Morgan's apartment, with them ready to begin another day of work. At this point, players are free to poke around their home, inspect their computer, and learn that they can pick up most objects. When players do decide it's time to take a helicopter to work, they'll spend the proper portion of the tutorial participating in a series of tests. Here you learn how to complete tasks like moving boxes out of a circle, hiding behind a chair, jumping over a small obstacle, and completing a psychiatric assessment. However, interactions between the observing scientists suggest that something isn't quite right, and when a mimic disguised as the doctor's coffee cup ambushes him, Prey pulls out the rug from under your feet. Morgan once again wakes up in their apartment, but this time things are different. It's revealed that everything players have just experienced has been a simulation. In reality, players have been part of an experiment on the Talos space station, which has been overrun by aliens. All of this sets up a grand mystery, and it's up to you to uncover the truth. Number 5. YOMAWARI, Night Alone. You're just walking your dog. YOMAWARI Night Alone is a creepy little indie horror gem that sees players wandering around a ghost-infested Japanese neighborhood in search of the protagonist's sister when she doesn't come home one night. Gameplay is as minimalist as it gets. Armed only with a flashlight which players can use to see the ghosts, you're limited to basic movement and item interactions as you roam the night streets. Even with such a simple setup, this title still has a tutorial with the express purpose of scarring you for life. Beginning innocently enough with a small girl taking her adorable dog Poro home after their walk, it's here that you're shown how to walk, run, and tiptoe while making your way down the road. This section also teaches you how to interact with objects when the girl spots a pebble. You naturally pick up the pebble and view it in your inventory, but when trying to interact with it further, the girl throws the pebble onto the road. Your dog Poro then chases after it and is immediately run over by a truck in a horrifically shocking turn of events. Number 4. Dark Souls, the surprise boss. Answers down in the comments as to the cruelest trick a From Software game has played on us as a collective, because I'm putting the Asylum Demon as one of the worst. Primarily because if this was your first Souls game, it really effed you up for the rest of the series. When the player's freshly created character escapes their cell in the Undead Asylum, messages on the ground teach you the fundamentals like attacking and locking onto enemies. At this point, you're only equipped with a broken weapon, but that's all that's needed for the enemies so far. As millions of us found out though, stepping through a large door still with your broken weapon leads to being ambushed by Dark Souls' first proper boss. Utterly unprepared mentally or through equipment, you literally have to learn that the only way forward is to run right past the demon altogether. Whether you figured that out for yourself after 10 tries or were told though, is something else entirely. Number 3. Dead Space 2, The Necromorph Chase. Usually horror video games offer players a moment of relative safety at the beginning so they can learn the controls and mechanics without any added stress getting in the way. Even Resident Evil Village allowed Ethan to explore his house before he's ambushed by a horde of werewolves. Alongside acting as tutorials, opening sections in horror games are likewise the perfect place for developers to establish tone and start building suspense. However, one game that doesn't honour this unspoken grace period is sci-fi horror masterpiece Dead Space 2. Taking place 3 years after the events of the first game, the sequel opens with protagonist Isaac Clarke being released from an asylum on the Sprawl space station. However, before rescuer Franco can explain what's happening or release him from his straitjacket, he's immediately killed by a necromorph right in front of you in grisly AF fashion. Without a moment to digest anything about what's going on, players must helplessly flee from all the swarming aliens, the button prompt to run being your only guidance on what to do. Ironically, with a tutorial as unexpectedly nerve-shredding as this, it has prepared you pretty well for what's to come. Number 2. Blair Witch, screwing you over from the beginning. Developed by Bloober Team, Blair Witch sees players return to the eerie Black Hills Forest 2 years after the spine-chilling events of the Blair Witch Project movie. Instead of being a student filmmaker though, players take on the role of former police officer Ellis, who alongside his faithful canine sidekick Bullet, journeys into the woods in search of a missing child. It doesn't take long for Ellis's experience to turn into a hellish nightmare though, as he becomes tormented by the malevolent witch who calls this forest her home. During the tutorial, one of the first things the players encounter is a wooden carving sitting on a fence. Being one of the first collectibles you can find, naturally you'll want to examine everything you can get your hands on, especially during this part of the game, when you're supposed to be exploring. However, this is a clever trick played by the developers. Turns out the Blair Witch wants Ellis to collect these items, and curious players fell right into her trap. Collecting any of the dolls or falling for various other sneaky tricks across your playthrough actually locks you into the bad ending, where you're trapped in the forest for good. And number 1, BIOSHOCK, Would You Kindly? The opening of acclaimed sci-fi horror shooter BIOSHOCK sees protagonist Jack stumble upon a lighthouse in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean after surviving a plane crash. Upon entering the structure and ascending into the ocean's depths in a bathysphere, the protagonist and the player are introduced to the dystopian underwater city of Rapture, where things appear to have gone very wrong. When the player arrives in this ominous city, a friendly Irish voice asks if Jack would kindly pick up the radio so they can talk. The voice introduces himself as Atlas and courteously walks Jack through the first part of the game, informing them about the basics of exploration and combat before tasking them with saving their family. BIOSHOCK's tutorial section is like every other game. However, it's not until much later when players realize that they are the ones who have been played this whole time. In one of the best twists in gaming set in motion across the tutorial, it's later revealed that the phrase "would you kindly" wasn't Atlas being polite, but a trigger to brainwash the protagonist and you into doing their bidding in what became a legendary example of analyzing player agency. And those are our picks for 8 video game tutorials that played cruel tricks on players. Let me know your favourites down in the comments below, and please subscribe to the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you soon.